The courtroom door opened with a creak that sounded louder than it should have. Heads turned, whispers ignited like sparks as Chris Brown stepped in, shoulders squared, face unreadable, Boothus eyes already carrying the weight of something far heavier than anyone anticipated. He wasn't called as a witness that day. No one was expecting him, but there he stood, requested under emergency motion by the prosecution, ready to speak on record for the first time about a past he had buried until now. The judge's brow lifted with restrained curiosity. Diddy, seated at the defense table, didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened, a micro-expression almost imperceptible that betrayed something more than surprise. It was recognition and something deeper, dread. Chris walked slowly to the witness stand, each step echoing in the courtroom like the start of a reckoning. When he sat down and placed his hand on the microphone, his voice didn't crack. It cut. He wasn't going to say anything. He began, because when you're young and famous, you think silence protects you. You think survival means playing the game, but I'm not here to play anymore. The room stilled. His gaze shifted toward Diddy, then toward the jury. I met him when I was 17, just a kid from Virginia with a voice and a dream, he said. He wanted to mentor me, said. I reminded him of a younger version of himself. I believed him before we dive deeper into this unforgettable video. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. That way you'll never miss any new coming videos like this. Now let's get back to it. Chris' jaw clenched, his hand gripping the edge of the stand. At first it was all love, invitations to parties, trips, introductions to people I'd only seen in magazines. It felt like a blessing, but I learned real fast. Everything he gives comes with a price. He looked down, eyes shallowed by memory. There was a party in 2009, a private one, no cameras, no phones, just Diddy's closest people. He invited me to come through, said it was a celebration. I went. What I saw there, I still can't sleep sometimes thinking about it. He paused. The judge didn't rush him. No one made a sound. There were rooms in that mansion that nobody talks about. Rooms where things happened that didn't look like fun. They looked like control. There were girls who looked scared, people being watched. And he was always just watching, smiling, like was testing everybody, seeing how far he could push it. Chris's voice dropped tighter now. I didn't say anything back then because I thought it was just how the industry worked. You keep quiet. You stay in line, and if you try to walk away, they remind you who made you. His eyes met Diddy's again. You did that. You used my name, my face, my pain, and you turned it into currency. The courtroom was still, but you could feel the heat rising, not from anger, but truth that was about to burn through the facade of femme. Chris Brown wasn't here for theatrics. He was here to unload years of silence, guilt, and fear. The courtroom was just beginning to understand the depth of what had really happened between them, and what he was about to reveal next would bring every mask crashing down. Chris took a slow breath, his hands visibly shaking. Now not from fear, but from the pent-up storm finally rising to the surface. The weight of years unspoken pressed down on him like a boulder, but he stood under it willingly, choosing truth over protection. The courtroom watched in stunned silence. It wasn't just what he was saying, it was how raw, how nakedly human he was as he said it. I know what some of y'all are thinking, he said, his voice quieter. Now you rethinking, Chris, you've had your own issues, you're no saint. And you're right, I've made mistakes, a lot of them, but what you don't know is how many of those mistakes were born from what I went through behind the scenes. What I was pulled into, what I wasn't ready for. He turned his gaze back to the jury, locking eyes with each of them. One by one, you see the headlines, the mug shots, the outbursts. But what you didn't see, what nobody saw, was the grooming, the manipulation, the way I was set up to crash before I ever really learned how to stand. His words struck deep. There was no script in his voice, no performance. This wasn't a celebrity giving testimony. This was a man unpacking trauma in real time. I was 19 when it started getting serious. Diddy had this way of making you feel like you owed him something. Like your career wasn't yours, it was a favor. Every move I made, he had his eyes on it. Every party, every deal, every feature had a hand in it somehow. And if I ever pulled away, ever tried to breathe on my own, he'd remind me, don't forget who put you in the room. He gritted his teeth. Every time I tried to walk, he'd put me in a different kind of room. He described a house in the hills, not Diddy's main mansion, but another property low-key unmarked. Inside, he said, was where the real control happened. There was a room with padded walls. I'm not joking. No windows, just music and mirrors and bottles and whatever else people needed to feel numb. Girls were brought in, some were industry, some were not, all of them told to smile to keep him happy. He paused. I remember one night, a girl started crying, said she didn't want to do it anymore. One of Diddy's guys walked in, handed her something, and told her to calm down or get replaced. I'll never forget her face, like she knew nobody was coming to help her. Chris's voice cracked, and he paused, swallowing hard before he continued. And the thing is, I didn't do anything either. I was frozen scared. Not her of him, of what would happen if I stepped out of line. That was the power her had. That's the power he still. As he looked back at Diddy, whose expression had not changed, stoic, still cold, but what he didn't know, Chris said, was that I started writing everything down. I started keeping notes, saving texts. I knew. I couldn't say anything back then, but I knew. One day, it would all come back. There was a hush in the courtroom, like everyone had just realized they were hearing history unfold. Not just a celebrity spilling tea, but a key piece off a much larger puzzle locking into place. Chris continued, his voice gaining strength now. He ruined lives, not just mine, not just the girls, other artists, young guys trying to make it. He dangled fame like a prize, then turned it into a chain, and if you tried to run, he'd tighten it. He leaned closer to the mic, almost whispering, now I spent years thinking I was broken, that it was all my fault. But now I see it clear. I wasn't the broken one. I was the one he couldn't break completely. The courtroom sat in stunned silence, and somewhere inside few walls of Diddy's carefully constructed image, a deep crack had just formed, and it was spreading. Chris leaned back slightly in the witness stand, his eyes flickering with something deeper than pain. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying a burden too long, from screaming in silence when no one is listening, and yet here he was using that silence as a weapon now. Not to destroy, but to reveal. I was 21 when I realized it wasn't free. He began again. By that point, I'd already had public breakdowns, fetch headlines. People thought I was losing it, and yeah, maybe I was, but they never squy. They never asked what I was running from. He paused and pointed slowly toward the defense table without ever saying Diddy's name again. I was running from him. Chris explained how the manipulation didn't end at parties or personal favors. It crept into contracts, into music rights, into brand deals. I just told I wasn't industry safe anymore, he said. Then suddenly I'm getting pulled from shows, my collaborations getting canceled. But behind the scenes he was calling the shots. He described how Diddy would invite him to meetings that weren't meetings, they were power checks. Rooms full of people Chris didn't know but who all answered to the man sitting across the courtroom. Now, it wasn't mentorship, it was surveillance. He wanted to make sure I was still in line. Chris's voice turned sharper, more focused. One time I said no, just once said I didn't want to go to one of his retreats. You know, the ones where they take your phones and tell you it's about spiritual cleansing. I said I had family stuff. A week later, TMZ had a story up about me getting into a fight that never happened. My image, my life was never fully mine. It was always hanging by a string that he held. The courtroom was quiet, listening not just to the words, but to the cracks between them. The invisible fractures. I'm a man who had been packaged as a headline for over a decade. There were nights I'd sit in my car and think about quitting, not the career, the whole thing, life, because I didn't know who I was anymore. Every decision I made felt like it had his fingerprint on it. And when you're in that deep, you stop trusting yours. His voice lowered to a whisper. I started taking pills, started drinking more. Not because I wanted to escape the world, but because I wanted to escape his world, the one he pulled me into and wouldn't let me leave. He paused again, longer this time, letting that confession soak into the walls of the courtroom. Do you know what it feels like to walk into a room and wonder who's real, who's been paid to watch you, who's waiting for you to slip? That's the paranoia he breathes. And for years I thought it was just me, that I was crazy. Chris looked at the jury again, but he wasn't crazy. I was controlled. He then described a moment that would stay with him forever, a New Year's Eve party in 2015. It was supposed to be a celebration, but he pulled me aside real quiet in the middle of the night and said, "Don't forget who gave you your name." And then he walked away like it was nothing but irremembered, and that was the night. I started planning how to take it back. Chris revealed that he began documenting his interactions from that point forward, every cryptic message, every controlling ment, every favor he was forced to accept. I didn't know what I'd use it for, but I knew someday someone would ask and I'd be ready. He took a breath and know where I am. The courtroom sat still, motionless. Even the judge, whose role demanded objectivity, seemed visibly affected. And I'm not telling you this for sympathy. Chris continued, I'm telling you because there are 100 other versions of me out there, artists, dancers, assistants, women, men, all caught in his orbit, too afraid to speak or too damagetto. Even remember how he turned his eyes one last time toward Diddy. You broke something in me and I let you because I didn't think I had a choice, a pause, but no. I do, and with that the room shifted again because this wasn't just a testimony anymore. It was a declaration of war against silence, against power without accountability, and against the lie that fame equals freedom, and everyone in that courtroom knew this history was just beginning. Chris rested his hands on the edge of the witness stand, his fingers tightening around Thewwood, as if anchoring himself in place. He wasn't giving a performance, he was bleeding truth into a room that was never meant to hear it. You could see it in his posture, in his eyes, in the way he wasn't looking for sympathy, he was looking for justice. Maybe not just for himself, but for all the others who never get this far. He looked up and spoke again. You want to know when I knew this was bigger than me? He asked that Courtroom. It was the day I tried to help somebody else and got threatened for it. He described a young R&B singer, barely 21, who had come to one of Diddy's private functions not as a guest but as an invitee. She thought it was a networking opportunity. She thought she'd be meeting producers, collaborators who could help her career, but what she got instead, Chris said, was something darker. She looked scared. Hera called. She didn't talk to anyone, just sat in the corner sipping water. When I asked her if she was okay, she said she'd been told she was chosen, but she didn't know what that meant, just that Shekel didn't leave until it was over. His voice grew heavier, more solemn. She didn't leave with her voice, she left with silence. And the next day her Instagram was gone, her label dropped her. A week later she vanished. Chris looked directly at the prosecutor's table. I tried to reach out, I asked questions, I made calls. And that's when I got the warning, a message from someone I used to trust: back off. This ain't your fight, Butte. It was my fight, it always had been. He detailed the systematic destruction of Fanyon, who tried to defy Diddy's grip, artists who were shelved without explanation, assistants who were let go after seeing too much, dancers who were flown out, used and erased, and all of it under the polished facade of mentorship culture and exclusivity. You think you're being groomed for greatness, Chris said, voice cold now, but you're really being shaped into silence. He then revealed something that made the entire courtroom shift in their seats: the existence of a private group chat among several male artists who had all once been under Diddy's umbrella. We called it the watch list, he said, because every few months someone would say they were being watched, not by fans, by people inside. He pulled out a sheet of messages redacted for privacy, showing cleared stamps and statements from 3 separate artists. Messages like, he said, I owed him and they took my phone, said it's protocol. One message, Chris said, came after an artist backed out of a scheduled party. If I disappear, tell the truth. The courtroom was frozen. Chris continued, he knew how to keep people close. Give you enough fame to taste it, but not enough to own it. Then when you tried to walk, he'd remind you who gave it to you. He paused, reflecting. And maybe that's what breaks you the most, not the threats, not the blackmail, but the fact that everything you thought you earned was just a leash waiting to be yanked. He leaned forward. I spent years in therapy trying to untangle myself from that influence, and you know what I learned? Trauma doesn't always come from violence. Sometimes it comes from control, from being owned in ways that don't leave bruises, just silence, doubt, shame. Chris spoke about the emotional damage, how even in moments of success he felt empty. When I won awards, I felt nothing. When I sold out arenas, I felt like I was performing for someone else's game because part of me still belonged to him. He looked to the judge, then to the jurors. I'm here today not because I want revenge or headlines. I'm here because I want this to stop. For the kids who are still walking into those rooms thinking it's their big break, when really it's just the beginning of their erasure, headed finally to Diddy for the first time. His voice was firm. Director yodeled me. I'd be a legend, you said. I'd thank you someday, but all I can say now is I survived you. And with that, the courtroom fell into complete silence. Second that doesn't demand attention, it commands it, because in that moment, no one saw a pop star, no one saw a celebrity. They saw a survivor, a witness, and the man on trial didn't flinch. Something behind his eyes flickered because he knew the lies were no longer Reno, and the truth had finally come to collect. Chris sat back for a moment, his chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. The weight of everything he had revealed didn't just live in the courtroom anymore, it now lived in the public consciousness. Every sentence he had spoken was already Buying dissected by the media echoed across timelines whispered in the green rooms of late night shows, but he wasn't done because the deepest cut hadn't been delivered yet. He leaned back into the mic and said quietly, "There's something I never thought I'd say out loud, something I've carried for years. I don't even know if I can explain it right, but here it is." He paused, everyone leaned forward. "I wasn't just manipulated, I was studied." The courtroom blinked in confusion. He continued, "Every time I had a breakdown, every time I messed up, said something reckless, hurt, someone crashed, Diddy would reach out, not to help, not to check in, but to document it. He'd ask me questions, subtle ones, what I remembered, who I blamed, how it made me feel." Chris clenched his jaw, and every time I thought he was just being a mentor, a big brother. But it wasn't that, it was data collection, psychological control, like he was building a profile, not of who I was, but of how to break me further. He described how the calls often came at his lowest points, right after an arrest, right after a scandal. He'd always start the same way. Chris said, "You know, I love O, right?" And somehow I'd feel safe again, but then he'd say, "Now, let's talk about what you did wrong." He looked out at the court. I wasn't even 25, and I didn't know who I was anymore, but he did because he made sure of it. Then Chris' voice changed, grew deeper, angrier. One night after a party, I got a call from one of his handlers. They told me there was footage of me in a room with someone I didn't remember. Said it wasn't a good look. Said it would be better if I stayed quiet about something I'd witnessed earlier that night. Hestered straight ahead. That was the first time I realized I wasn't just being watched, I was being used. They knew I'd been drugged. They knew I was vulnerable. You don't protect, you possess, and the worst part, you don't even deny it, because in your world this is normal. Chris's voice cracked slightly now, but it's not normal, it's sick, and I'm not scared of you anymore. He set the notebook down on the court's evidence table with a quiet thud that echoed louder than any outburst. "I'm not scared of what comes next, because what you took from me, I'm finally getting back." Theron sat in stillness. What Chris had just done wasn't just testify, he had detonated years of secrets with one choice: to speak. And soon the world would hear it all. Chris sat motionless for a long moment after placing the notebook on the evidence table. No one dared to move. The courtroom wasn't just listening anymore, it was witnessing something historic. The judge's face was pale, Fedri looked stunned. And even seasoned reporters in the gallery had stopped writing. This wasn't a performance, this was a man testifying from the depths of his soul. And what he revealed next would stretch even deeper. "They think this is about fame," Chris said, breaking the silence about drama headlines. "But this isn't about my career, it's about my sanity." He paused, swallowing hard. "There were nights I didn't sleep, nights I was scared to close my eyes, because I knew, I felt that something was always watching me. I could be in a hotel in Europe or a studio in Atlanta, and I'd get a message from someone in Diddy's orbit, just checking in, just making sure I was good, always friendly, but always too timely." He leaned forward, and every time I tried to separate myself, to pull away from him, something happened. A project would fall through, a collaboration would go cold, a producer I trusted would suddenly stop picking up calls. It was like there was this invisible thread, and any time I tried to cut it, I bled. He described how over the years he tried to confront it indirectly. He'd hint in interviews, vent in songs, but the machine always cleaned it up. They'd edit it out. They'd tell me not to push that narrative, that it would make things worse. What they meant was it would make him angry. Chris recounted a particularly jarring night during a music festival where he refused to attend an after-party thrown by Diddy's inner circle. "I was tired, I wanted to rest, but then I got the call, not from Diddy, but from one of his people. They said, 'You sure you want to sit this one out? You know how that looks, right?'" The implication was clear: decline an invitation. And the door starts to close. Next thing I know, 3 sponsorship deals go quiet. Overnight, no explanation or response. Chris shook his head. That's how he moved: silent, strategic, vengeful. And everyone around him knew it. Then he revealed something the prosecution hadn't even anticipated. A recorded voicemail from 2017 from Diddy himself. "I kept it not because I wanted revenge, but because part of me always knew this day would come." With the judge's approval, the court played the voicemail aloud. The voice was unmistakable. Diddy's smooth tone, casual but laced with menace. "You've got talent, Chris, I see that. But don't forget who opened those doors for you. This industry's got a long memory. Play smart, stay close, and everything stays clean. Start acting out and things get complicated." The message ended with a simple, chilling, "Be good little bro." The silence that followed was deafening. The jury looked sick. The judge cleared his throat. but didn't speak. Chris stared ahead. That was the last time I spoke to him directly. After that, I went silent. I stopped fighting. I just complied. He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe I could erase all of it. Maybe I could wake up one day and be free. He shook his head. But silence doesn't bring freedom. It just gives Thedival more room to dance. He turned back to the jury. I know what I'm saying is hard to believe. I know it's big, but I wouldn't be here with this if I didn't believe it was necessary. He gestured to the evidence pile beside him, his notebook, the printed messages, the voicemail. This isn't just about what headed to me. It's about what he keeps doing to others, the artists, the women, the people you never hear about because they didn't survive the system. His voice strengthened again, sharp with righteous fury. I got out barely, but not everybody does. Some disappear, some self-destructing, some still live in his shadow, too scared to step into the light. Thick courtroom sat in stillness, the weight of his words choking the space around them. Chris finished steady and unflinching. I'm here today because someone has to say it. Someone has to look him in the eye and say, you don't own us anymore. And just like that, the illusion began. Tokrak, a little more the myth of power, the performance of mentorship, the shield off fame, because the truth was no longer whispered in silence. It was spoken boldly, painfully, and without apology into a courtroom that could no longer pretend it didn't hear it. Chris leaned forward again, eyes locked on Diddy. His voice lower now, steadier, more dangerous in its calm. It wasn't fury fueling him anymore, it was conviction. And when he spoke, he didn't raise his voice. Hadn't need to. You're the reason my life fell apart. The words hit the courtroom like a slow-moving detonation. No shouting, no dramatics, just 5 words. So loaded, so final, they silenced. Even the whispers echoing off the walls. Diddy didn't flinch. Not visibly, but Chris didn't need a reaction. That wasn't why he said it. He said it because after years of carrying the weight of confusion, anger, guilt, insolence, he had finally located the source of it all. And he was naming it. You didn't just manipulate my image or my deals, you manipulated me. Chris continued, you saw a kid with raw talent, a big heart, and no idea how this business really works. And instead of guiding me, you turned me into a pawn in your game? He blinked, eyes glassy but not breaking. People see the headlines, the fights, the charges, the erratic behavior, and they think I'm the villain in my own story. But what they don't see is what came before all of that. They didn't see the traps you laid, the pressure you applied, the way you built me up, just so you could break me down. His voice gained quiet intensity. Do you remember that night in 2012 when you pulled me aside at that party in Miami? You told me you're getting too loud, too big, you need to stay humble. I thought you were giving advice now. I know it was a warning. He looked down for a moment, shaking his head. You needed me broken. Best broken people are easier to control. Chris turned back to the judge and jury from the outside. I looked like I had it all, talent, fame, money, but inside I was empty because everything I built was standing on a floor that he could pull out from under me at any moment. He described how even at his shyest career moments he felt like he was just surviving, always wondering when the next punishment would come, always walking on glass. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my own team. I'd get paranoid-lish out, and every time I fell apart in public, he was in the background calling, pretending to support me, when really he was just measuring how much damage I'd done and whether he could use it. The prosecution asked him to clarify what he meant by use it. Chris nodded. I mean, he used my chaos as leverage to remind me who was keeping my career alive. Ta threatened me without words. He didn't have to say, I'll ruin you. He just had to say, remember where you came from. That was enough. And then Chris dropped the moment that changed everything. I have the texts. He said, from him, from his team, the ones that came after every public mistake. They always followed the same pattern: flattery, shame, and control. He reached into his folder, pulled out a printed sheet, and submitted it to the bailiff. The judge reviewed it silently, then allowed the prosecution to read it aloud. One message read, tough week, huh? You're still my guy, though. Just don't forget, we cleaned it up before. We can clean it up again, but you gotta stay close. Another, we all mess up, but what, don't bite the hand that feeds. Let's keep it tight, family. And another, next time you feel like talking, call me first. You never know who's really listening. The courtroom sat stunned. These weren't check-ins. Chris said they were threats wrapped in love, the kind of love that suffocates you slowly. He sat up straighter now, the weight of his words transforming into something powerful, a declaration, a liberation. I've been blamed for everything. My anger, my addictions, my choices, and I take a responsibility for that. I do, but today I'm making it Clear, I didn't fall apart in my own. I was pushed over and over and over by a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He turned back to Diddy for the final time, and I'm still here, still standing, because the one thing you didn't expect is that I'd survive long enough to tell the truth. The judge called for a recess. The jury sat frozen. Reporters practically scrambled over each other to get out of the courtroom. And did he, for the first time, his mask flipped because Chris hadn't just told a story? He had exposed a system, and in 5 words he had delivered the blow no headline ever could. You're the reason my life fell apart. Chris remained seated as the judge called the recess, his hands resting quietly on the edge of the witness box, his eyes fixed not on Diddy anymore, but on the jury. His face was calm, not because the storm had passed, but because he had finally walked straight through it and survived. He wasn't the boy Diddy once manipulated. He wasn't the chaotic figure the tabloids twisted for headlines. He was a man now, and he had done the one thing no one thought he would ever do. He had told the truth. The courtroom slowly tightened the brake, but Chris stayed in his seat, protected by silence and surrounded by the weight of every word he had delivered. People passed by him, cautiously unsure if they should speak or bow their heads in respect. Even the prosecution team, who had seen countless witnesses over the years, gave him space, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. When court resumed, the judge's voice was noticeably softer. "Mr. Brown," he said, "do you have anything else you'd like to add before we conclude your testimony?" Chris nodded slowly. He rose from his chair, stepped back up to the mic, and took a deep breath. "I didn't come here to take anything from anyone," he began. "Not a career, not a legacy, not even revenge. I came here to give something back, the truth." He looked out over the room, then directly into the lens of the court's broadcast camera. "I want people to understand this isn't just about music or fame or even Diddy. This is about power and how easily it gets abused when no one's watching. This is about what happens when young artists walk into the industry thinking they found family but end up walking into a trap." He paused. "Andy, no, there are more of us people watching this right now who are still too scared to speak, still trying to convince themselves that what happened to them wasn't that bad, still thinking that staying silent means staying safe." His eyes flickered with intensity. "But silence doesn't make you safe, it makes them stronger." The courtroom held its breath as he continued. "I've been through hell. I've been judged, dragged, laughed at, and left out to dry, and still am standing, not because I'm perfect, but because I finally decided my truth mattered more than my reputation." He turned one final time to Diddy, whose face had grown stone cold, unreadable. "You taught me how to hide my pain, how to perform my trauma, but now I'm teaching you and everyone like you that no amount of power can keep the truth buried forever." The silence that followed was so thick it felt like time had stopped. Chris nodded to the judge, then stepped down. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. As he walked past the rows of seats, people rose silently to their feet, not because they were told to, because they had to, because they knew they had just witnessed something far beyond celebrity gossip or courtroom theatrics. They had witnessed liberation, and as Chris exited the courtroom into a swarm of reporters, flashing cameras, and a roaring crowd hadn't flinched. He didn't smile. He just walked forward. For the first time in years, every step he took belonged to him. And far behind him, in a courtroom where secrets were no longer safe, the empire that once ruled through silence began to crumble, brick by brick, under the weight of the truth.